Kawhi Leonard has elected against returning to the Spurs' active roster this season despite being medically cleared. According to our Adrian Wojnarowski, if Leonard does return, it will be because he has decided he can manage the discomfort of this injury. Stephen A., I find this all very interesting. What does this tell you, though, about Kawhi?
It tells me that Kawhi's relationship with the San Antonio Spurs is not as great as it could be. That's what it tells me. Now, whether that's because of Kawhi or whether it's because of his uncle, Dennis Robertson, I'm not so sure. From my understanding, remember, his uncle came out last month and emphatically declared that the ESPN reports by Woj and others was false, that there was no friction between Kawhi Leonard and the San Antonio Spurs. Well, if that's true, then that may be true with Kawhi, but that's not necessarily true with the uncle. Somebody has an issue with the Spurs. The Spurs has an issue with somebody. Kawhi could be, in the middle of all of this, obviously. Whether or not he's instigated it is unclear. But the relationship is not as ideal as it could have been. He's had issues, from my understanding, with the level of treatment that he has received from the San Antonio Spurs. To what degree, I do not know. But you have heard, and you do hear throughout NBA circles, that Kawhi Leonard is of the mindset that, from a medical perspective, he could be treated better. They've mishandled his injury. And so if he feels that way, you're the first-class organization that the San Antonio Spurs is. You are not going to take such assertions lightly. You think that you're first class from top to bottom. Obviously, Greg Popovich goes out of his way to protect the players. R.C. Buford is class personified. Peter Holt is one of the great owners in the sport. That's not something that you want to hear about your organization. More importantly, it's not really something you've ever heard. From the days of David Robinson to the days of Tim Duncan with Manu and Tony Parker and others. These are not the kind of things that you hear about the organization. This is not the kind of thing you hear about a coach that religiously goes about the business of protecting his players, so much so that there are times that he sat them down for nationally televised games, avoiding back-to-backs, making sure they happen at proper rest, all of this other stuff. This is an organization that prides itself on taking care of his players. Well, Kawhi Leonard or his uncle or the stories that are out there seem to be implying something totally different that has been disseminated about the Spurs as an organization for quite some time. Again, I do not know. I haven't spoken to anybody about this. Wojnarowski has been talking about it along with others. But these are the kind of things. You go from arena to arena. When the subject of Kawhi Leonard comes up, this is what you hear. And because that stuff is what's coming up and that stuff is what you're hearing, the relationship can't possibly be pristine at this particular moment in time because the Spurs have ventured into uncharted waters. They are not accustomed to hearing these kind of stories about them as an organization on any level, and that cannot be a good thing, Max.
This is one of the most bizarre NBA stories I can remember really in my lifetime when you consider the participants involved. And I think that's why I and you and others, Stephen A., have zeroed in on the uncle. Because the relationship seemed to be in a good place and it's going along and he's getting better and better in the Spurs. And then the uncle takes over the business and now this. And so whether or not it's the uncle, just by logical deduction, that's the thing that seems to be different, right? In a relationship that seems, from the outside, to be excellent.
Before you go on, let me say this. I've been told directly that the uncle has been a problem. So I'm not deducing it to the uncle. I have been told directly that the uncle is a problem for the organization, even though he's categorically denied that.
I have heard the same thing, but I have not spoken to the Spurs organization, nor do I know his uncle. That's what people are saying.
Yes.
But I think that's why, even from the outside, you can deduce it. Like, everything's a certain way, add a catalyst, and then all of a sudden things change, and so you point to that thing that was added, and that's the uncle. Here's what's so bizarre about it, though, when you just, like, before we get into what's going on with the relationship, Kawhi Leonard, when last seen, I'm here to tell you, Stephen A., I know you say Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant has more spectacular offense. Kawhi Leonard's one of the best players I've ever seen in my life, in any era. I think he's what Grant Hill would have been, ideally, if Hill never got hurt. I think he's a better version of Scottie Pippen. He is a guy who can carry your offense, take incredibly high percentage shots, work within it, not complain, do everything you want him to do offensively, and hit his shots at an extremely efficient rate, and then while guarding the other player's best offensive player all game as well as is humanly possible. I think Kawhi Leonard was the heir apparent to LeBron James. Nothing against Kevin Durant, who's an all-time great. But I think Kawhi, when healthy, was the second best player. And then you think that when last seen, they were up 20-something on Golden State in Game 1. And then he gets hurt and everything falls apart. And then you think that this might be Popovich's greatest coaching job yet this season. Everyone except for LaMarcus Aldridge is averaging 20-something minutes. They're third in the West. He's doing it with spitting bubblegum, smoking mirrors somehow. And you would think Kawhi Leonard, given the level he was performing on when last seen, if he's ready to go, would be rushing to get back to San Antonio because they could maybe shock the world. We're all talking about Golden State and Houston. Add Kawhi Leonard, who knows? And yet he's not. So my first thought is he must be really hurt. He must be feeling that whatever's showing up medically, it doesn't feel right to him. But the more people you talk to, Stephen A., which is what I was getting at, you mentioned it earlier, the more it seems it's actually a relationship thing. And that, given the history of the San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich, and Kawhi Leonard, is shocking. It is possible that he's played his last game in San Antonio because when you hear Greg Popovich say what he said, hey, it's getting late in the season, he's speaking to Kawhi Leonard. He's not talking to us. He's saying, you got to come back if you want to play this year.